Welcome to Heart Over Gold, the channel where love, kindness, and humanity shine brighter than any fortune. In today's story, Eleanor Carter never imagined her life would take her from a quiet countryside village to the grand mansion of London's elusive billionaire, Alastair Finch. At just 22, she carried with her the warmth of her parents' support and the courage to chase a better life. For 8 long months, she worked as a housekeeper in Alastair's pristine home, watching the man everyone called cold and unapproachable retreat into his study each night. But behind the perfectly tailored suits and ruthless reputation, Eleanor began to notice something else: an unspoken loneliness in his eyes, a hidden softness that no one else seemed to see. And as days turned into weeks, the distance between employer and employee slowly blurred, awakening feelings Eleanor had never known before and drawing her into a dangerous world where desire, fear, and longing collided. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, and keep up with our latest stories. Eleanor wiped the glass coffee table in the living room for the 3rd time that morning. It wasn't dusty at all, she was simply restless. Something about the atmosphere in that vast London mansion always unsettled her, especially whenever Mr. Alastair Finch was nearby. She had been employed there for 8 months, ever since leaving her small countryside village where opportunities were scarce and dreams often felt out of reach. At only 22, Eleanor had gathered the courage to leave her parents, who had always supported her hand move to the capital, even if it meant beginning with nothing. When she first read about the housekeeper position at the home of Alastair Finch, a 29-year-old businessman who owned a powerful corporate empire, she thought the pay had to be a mistake. It was 3 times more than what she could have earned back home, enough to send money to her parents and still afford a decent life in the city. Alastair's reputation preceded him. People whispered he was difficult, detached, and completely absorbed in his career. In the early months, Eleanor believed every rumor. He hardly acknowledged her presence, offering nothing more than a quick nod before shutting himself away in his study. But recently, things had shifted. She noticed his gaze lingering on her while she cleaned, cooked, or arranged the rooms. Each time he entered the kitchen for coffee and silently watched her, she felt a spark, like electricity running through her veins. Back in her village, she had a few simple suitors, but none of them stirred her heart the way Alastair's presence did. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with piercing dark eyes that seemed to strip away facades. His suits cost more than she could earn in a year. His cars gleamed with luxury, and he carried himself like a man used to giving orders and being obeyed. Yet beneath that powerful image, Eleanor sometimes caught glimpses of weariness, even loneliness. He hid when he thought no one was watching. For Eleanor, who had always been a dreamer, it stirred something deep. She often imagined what it would be like if this mansion were not just her workplace, but a true home filled with laughter, warmth, and love. That morning, as she arranged books on the living room shelf, the sound of his car in the garage made her heart leap. She kept her head down, pretending to focus. But when Alastair entered, he didn't go directly to his study. He stopped and watched her. She felt the weight of his presence instantly. Still, she kept rearranging the books, though her hands trembled slightly. "Good morning, Eleanor." His voice carried a softness she hadn't heard before. Turning, she clutched a book to her chest, as though it might shield her. "Good morning, Mr. Finch," she managed, though her voice quivered. His eyes lingered on her face, intense and searching, until her cheeks warmed with color. For the first time, it felt as though he truly saw her not just as an employee, but as a woman. He broke the gaze, raking a hand through his dark hair. An uncharacteristic gesture. "You're doing excellent work," he said, and his tone carried something beyond professional courtesy. Her heart pounded wildly. For a fleeting second, she wondered what it would feel like if he stepped closer, if his hand touched her cheek. But just as quickly, he moved on toward his study, leaving her clutching the book to her chest and knowing, deep inside, that something between them had shifted forever. Eleanor understood the danger. She was only a housekeeper. He was a millionaire. Their worlds couldn't be further apart. But the heart never listened to such logic. Hers had already begun to lean toward the mysterious man who hid behind wealth and perfectly tailored suits. She turned to leave, but stopped with her hand on the doorknob. "Just so you know, for me, it wasn't a mistake. It was the most beautiful thing that has ever happened to me." And with that, she left Festity, leaving Alcester alone with the weight of his own words. Don't miss out on more stories like this. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you're always the first to know when we upload. A new life, a new hope. 6 weeks had passed since that painful conversation in the study, and Eleanor had managed to establish a profession routine with Alistair. They greeted each other politely when they met during the day. She did her job with the same dedication as always, and he maintained the respectful distance he had established. But beneath that apparent normality, Eleanor carried a constant ache in her chest, a longing for that man who was so close during the day and at the same time so distant. She had considered several times resigning and returning Tower Village with her parents, but something prevented her from making that decision. It was as if a part of her still hoped he would change his mind, that he would recognize that what they had felt together was too special to bite not. It was a Thursday morning that Eleanor realized something was different. She woke up in the small apartment she rented near the mansion with a strange feeling in her stomach, a mix of nausea and dizziness that made her rush to the bathroom. After a few minutes of deep breathing and trying to calm down, she got ready for work, thinking that perhaps it was something she had eaten the day before. But when she arrived at the mansion and began to prepare breakfast, smelling the coffee she was making, the nausea returned with full force, and she had to grab onto the sink to keep from falling. Over the next few days, the symptoms only worsened. Eleanor felt nauseous mainly in the mornings, had a strange sensitivity to smells that didn't bother her before, and realized she was more tired than usual. At work, she tried to hide it, especially when Alcester was near. But every now and then, she needed to take a break and sit down for a few minutes. At first, she tried to ignore it, thinking it might be stress or accumulated fatigue. But when she realized her period was 2 weeks late, a chill ran through her body. She sat on the edge of the apartment bed and tried to calculate the dates, her heart beating faster and faster. The possibility forming in her head was both terrifying and exciting. Eleanor had always dreamed of being a mother, always imagined what it would be like to carry a child, to feel the first movements, to lovingly prepare a nursery. But in her fantasies, that always happened within a happy marriage, with a man who loved her and was eager to start a family with her. The reality she was facing was very different. If she were truly pregnant, it would be by the man who had made it clear that with a band between them was a mistake. On Saturday, Eleanor couldn't bear the uncertainty any longer. She left home very early and went to a pharmacy far from her neighborhood and also far from the mansion where she was sure she wouldn't meet anyone she knew. She bought a pregnancy test, hid it in her bag, and returned to the apartment with her heart pounding. She locked herself in the bathroom and took several deep breaths before opening the box, following the instructions. Ilalana took the test and sat on the edge of the bathtub to wait for the result. They were the longest 3 minutes of her life. She stared at the test, praying softly, not knowing exactly what she was praying for. Part of her wanted it to be positive, because the idea of having a baby, even in difficult circumstances, filled her with inexplicable joy. But another part was terrified, thinking about how Alastaster would react. How she would manage to raise a child alone if he didn't want to take responsibility. When the time passed, Angie looked at the result. The 2 pink lines were there, clear and defeat, positive. Elilena was pregnant. She held the test carefully and felt tears well up in her eyes. A mixture of joy, fear, and a deep emotion she couldn't define. Inside her, a baby was growing. A part of Alastaster and a part of her. The fruit of that perfect night he considered a mistake. She placed her hand on her still flat belly and whispered, "Hello, my love. Mummy's here, and I already love you so much." In the following days, Eleanor lived on an emotional roller coaster. During work at the mansion, she tried to maintain normally, but it was difficult to concentrate when her mind was constantly in the baby growing inside her. 1 hour she was radiant, imagining what it would be like to teach her child to walk, to talk, to play in the yard. Another hour she was in a panic, thinking about how she would tell Alastaster, how he would react if he would get angry, if he would fire her immediately. She called her mother a few times, wanting to tell her everything. Butelways hung up before talking about the pregnancy. She knew her parents would worry and want her to come home immediately. For a whole week, Eleanor watched Alistair during the day when he wasn't looking, trying to imagine where it would be like as a father. She saw him talking on the phone with his young nephews and noticed that his voice became softer, more affectionate. There were times she caught him smiling. He didn't know she was watching, and that gave her hope that perhaps, deep down, he wasn't as cold as he wanted Topia. But then she remembered his words in the study, how he had called that night a mistake, and the fear returned with full force. Eleanor knew she couldn't postpone it any longer. The longer she waited, the harder it would, and she wouldn't be able to hide the pregnancy forever. She decided she would tell him on a Friday, at the end of the day when he came home from work. And she still had a little time before she left. She spent the whole day rehearsing what she would say, how she would start the conversation, trying to anticipate all his possible reactions. "Alistair, I need to tell you something important," she murmured to herself as tidied the house. "Alistair, something happened that's going to change everything." She tried another way. When the time came, Eleanor was more nervous than she had ever been. She heard his car in the garage and took a deep breath, trying to gather courage. It was now or never. She would tell him about the baby, and regardless of his reaction, she was determined to move forward. This was going to be loved, was going to have a mother who would do anything for them, even if the father didn't want to be a part of their lives. Eleanor placed her hand on her belly once more and whispered, "No matter what happens, my love, Mommy will take care of you. If you're finding yourself emotionally invested in Eleanor's journey, hit the like button and let us know. Your engagement fuels our passion for storytelling." The unthinkable rejection. When Alistair entered the mansion that Friday, Elena noticed he was different from usual. It wasn't the fatigue she had seen that night months ago, but a tension in his shoulders that indicated it had been a particularly difficult day in business. He greeted her with a nod, as he always did, and headed towards his study. Eleanor took a deep breath and decided she would wait about 15 minutes for him to settle in before going to talk to him. She tidied the kitchen one more time, put away some already clean utensils, anything to keep her hands busy while she gathered courage. When she finally knocked on the study door, Eleanor felt her heart race. "Mr. Finch, may I speak with you, please?" she asked, trying to keep her voice firm. "It's something important." There was a pause from the other side of the door before he replied. "Come in." Eleanor opened the door and found Alcester sitting behind his desk, touching some papers. He looked up at her with that professional expression that had become usual between them. "What is it, Il?" he asked, and there was a slight impatience in his voice, as if she were interrupting something important. "I need to talk to you about something that happened," Eleanor began, closing the door behind her. She had rehearsed those words all morning, but now in front of him, everything seemed to come out differently. "It's about that night, a few weeks ago." Alcester immediately stiffened, dropping the papers on the table. "Ilalana, I already said that was a mistake, that we're not going to talk about it." His voice was firmer than usual. "I thought we had settled that situation." "Alistair," Eleanor said, not using Mr. for the first time since a fat conversation in the study, "I'm pregnant." The words came out simple and direct, without beating around the bush. She had thought of several ways to tell him, Buton, the end. The naked truth was the only thing that managed to escape her mouth. The silence that followed was deafening. Alcester remained completely motionless, his eyes fixed on her as if hadn't understood what she had said. His face gradually lost color, and Eleanor saw several emotions pass through his eyes. Shock, disbelief, fear, and then something that looked like rage. "This can't be happening," Alcester said, abruptly getting up from his chair. "It can't." He began to pace back and forth in the study, running his hands through his hair. "Are you sure? Did you take a test? Anything?" Eleanor almost smiled despite the tension of the moment. "We made love. What did Yo think I was going to get?" "Loyalty points," she replied with a hint of irony. "I took the test at home. It came back positive, and the symptoms, I'm sure." Alcester stopped pacing and turned to her, and the expression on his face made Eleanor's heart sink. It wasn't joy. It wasn't even acceptance. It was pure desperation. "Eleanor, you have to understand, Thethys is going to complicate everything," Alcester said, his voice tense. "Me career, my image, my businesses. I can't have a child with my employee. Do you understand the scandal this will cause?" His words were like slaps to Eleanor's face. He was thinking about his reputation, about his businesses, about everything. But the baby growing inside her. "Alcester, it's your child." Her voice began to tremble with emotion. "Our child?" Alcester shook his head vigorously. "I can't be a father now. Not like this. Not with you. Not under these circumstances." He sat back down in his chair, burying his head in his hands. "You have to resolve this situation, Eleanor. There are ways to not let this go forward. I'll pay for everything. You don't have to worry about it." Eleanor felt as if the ground had collapsed beneath her feet. He was suggesting she'd get rid of the baby, eliminate the life that had begun to grow inside her. "I'm not going to do it," Eleanor said, her voice gaining strength. "Never. This baby is my child. It's part of me, and I'm not giving him up for anything in this world." Tears began to roll down her face, but she didn't care. "I always dreamed of being Amatha Alcester, always. And now that this dream is happening, you want me to give up. You want me to get rid of my own child." Alcester raised his head and looked at her, and Eleanor saw it. His eyes were also terror-y, but he was struggling to maintain control. "You don't understand the situation," Alcestis said. "I have responsibilities, commitments. A child will change everything, complicate everything." Eleanor wiped her tears with the back of her hand and took a deep breath. "Then I'll make things easier for you." Her voice was firmer now. "I'm not getting rid of my child, but you don't have to worry. I can very well take care of him alone." Alcestis looked at her with a confused expression. "I'm only asking for one thing, Eleanor Kenton, that you have. The decency to take care of me and the baby until the baby is born. Give me the conditions to have proper prenatal care, to eat well, to take care of your child's health." "And what if I don't want to do that?" Alcestis asked, and there was a challenge in his voice. Eleanor straightened her shoulders and looked him directly in the eyes. "Then you can say so now, and I'll leave today," she replied. "I'll go back to my village. I'll live with my parents again. They'll welcome me, and I'll raise my child there. Far from you, you'll never have to see me or the baby again. But if you choose that path, I want you to know that you're giving up your own blood, your own child." Silence once again dominated the study. Alcestis stared at her for a long time, and Eleanor could see the struggle going on inside his head. For a moment, she hoped he would change his mind, that he would realize that this baby could be a blessing instead of a problem. But when spoke again, his voice was tired, defeated. "You can stay at the mansion," he said. "I'll take care of everything. The medical appointments, the food, everything you and the baby need. But I want to make one thing clear. I'm doing this out of responsibility, not out of love. When the baby is born, we'll talk about how things will be from then on." Eleanor nodded, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. At least the baby would be born healthy, would have everything it needed. But she knew the journey she was beginning was going to be very difficult. "Thank you," she said softly. "I promise I won't cause any problems, that I won't bother your life." Alcestis didn't respond. He just nodded and looked back at the papers on the table, signaling that the conversation was over. Eleanor left study with a broken heart, but with the certainty that she had done the right thing. Her child was going to Bayburn, and she would love him enough for two. What would you have done in Eleanor's situation? Would you have accepted Alcestis's terms? Share your thoughts in the comments below. A gilded cage. In the week following that difficult conversation in the study, Eleanor moved into the mansion. Alcestis had arranged one of the guest rooms for her, a spacious and comfortable space on the second floor, far from his main bedroom. It was a beautiful room with a king-size bed, a huge wardrobe, and a view of the garden. But to Eleanor, it felt more like a gilded cage than a home. She brought her few belongings from the apartment she rented and tried to make the space feel like home, placing a photo of her parents on the nightstand and organizing her simple clothes in the wardrobe, which was far too large for them. Alcestis had also hired a caregiver to accompany Eleanor during her pregnancy. Mrs. Davies was a five-year-old woman, experienced in caring for pregnant women who came every morning and stayed until it afternoon. She was gentle and caring, always asking if Eleanor was feeling anything, if she needed anything specific, if the nausea was better. But no matter how affectionate Mrs. Davies was, Eleanor couldn't feel comfortable. It was strange to have someone looking after her all the time, asking what she wanted to eat, if she had slept well, if she was taking her vitamins correctly. The first few days in the mansion were the most difficult. Eleanor would wake up in the large, silent room in the morning, and for a few seconds, she would forget where she was. She missed the street noise that came through her apartment window, the smell of bread from the bakery downstairs, the feeling of independence she had when she lived alone. Now she was comfortable, had everything she needed. But she felt like a stranger in the house where she had worked for so many months. During the day, Mrs. Davies kept her busy with light walks in the garden, breathing exercises, and conversation. The pregnancy, but the nights were long and lonely. Alcester had returned to his routine of leaving early and arriving late, but now he managed to avoid any encounters with Eleanor. When she was in the living room, he would use Seth's side entrance to go straight to his study. When she was in the kitchen having breakfast, he would just grab a coffee and take it to his room. It was as if they were two ghosts sharing Thesam House, each trying not to cross the other's path. Eleanor noticed the effort made to avoid her, and that hurt more than she expected. One night, when Eleanor couldn't sleep and went down to the kitchen to get a glass of milk, she heard Alcester talking on the phone in his study. The door was ajar, and she could hear part of the conversation. "No, Mother, I won't be at Sunday lunch," he said, his voice tired. "I have some personal matters to resolve here." There was a pause, and then he continued, "It's nothing serious, just some changes in my life that I need to process." Eleanor stood in the kitchen, wondering if the personal matters had anything to do with her and the baby. It was strange to think that her pregnancy was affecting other aspects of his life, too. During medical appointments, Alcester managed not to go with her. He paid for everything, left the money with Mrs. Davies, and asked her to accompany Eleanor to the doctor. Eleanor understood that he didn't want to be seen with her, that he didn't want to create speculation, but it saddened her. She saw other pregnant women arriving at appointments, accompanied by their husbands, their boyfriends, and she wondered what it would be like if Alcester were there holding her hand, listening to the baby's heartbeat for the first time, seeing the first ultrasound images. Calls to her parents become more frequent and more difficult. Every week her mother would call asking how she was, if work was going well, if she was happy in London. Eleanor invented stories about living in a family home, that they were very good to her, that she was saving money and managing well in the big city. She knew that sooner or later she would have told them about the baby, but she still didn't know how to do it without worrying her parents. They would want to know who the father was. They would want her to come home, and Eleanor wasn't for those conversations yet. During the afternoons, when Mrs. Davies left and the mansion became silent, Eleanor spent time in the garden, sitting on the bench under the big tree, her hand on her belly, which still showed no signs of pregnancy. She talked softly to the baby, told him about the grandparents who lived far away, about the grandparents who didn't yet know he existed, about the father who was too scared to accept that he was going to be a dad. "Your daddy is a good man," she whispered. "He's just scared. But when you're born, he's going to love I'm sure." Alcester from his study sometimes looked out the window and saw Eleanor in the garden. He tried not to look, tried to focus on his work. Booth's eyes always returned to her. There was something about the image of her sitting alone with her, hand on her belly that moved him in a way he couldn't explain. A part of him wanted to go down, sit beside her, ask how she was feeling, if the baby was okay. But another part, the part that had always controlled his life, said it was better to keep a distance, that if he got emotionally involved, things would become even more complicated. At night, when Eleanor had already gone up to her room, Alcester sometimes walked through the house and stopped in front of her door. He could hear the faint sound of the television, sometimes soft music, and wondered if she was okay, if she was comfortable, if she was happy. He knew he had offered only the bare minimum, a place to live, food, medical assistance, but he hadn't offered affection, companionship, presence, and for the first time since he learned about the pregnancy, began to question if he was doing the right thing. What do you think is going through Alistair's mind as he watches Eleanor? Will he finally open up to the idea of fatherhood? Let us know your thoughts. A glimmer of change. It was in the 4th month of pregnancy that Alistair began to act differently. Eleanor noticed the change one Tuesday morning when she was in the kitchen preparing chamomile tea to calm the nausea that still bothered her occasionally. Alistair came down for breakfast before going to work as headed every day. But this time, instead of just grabbing his cup and leaving, he stopped and looked at Juan. "How are you feeling?" he asked, and there was a genuine concern in his voice that Eleanor didn't expect. She was so surprised that it took her a few seconds to respond. "I'm fine," she said. "The nausea is lessening." Alistair nodded and stood there for a few more seconds, if he wanted to say something, but didn't know what. In the days that followed, these small interactions became more frequent. Alistair began to ask if she had slept well, if she was eating correctly, if Mrs. Davies was taking good care of her. They were simple, quick questions. But for Elena, who had spent weeks being treated as if she were invisible, that attention meant a lot. She began to look forward to those moments, to be anxious to see him appear in the kitchen in the morning, to hear his voice asking above her and the baby. One Thursday, Eleanor was in the garden when she felt her phone vibrate. It was a message. From Alistair. "Is everything okay there?" "Mrs. Davies said, you looked a little pale this morning." Eleanor looked at the message and felt her heart race. It was the first time he had sent her a personal message since he learned about the pregnancy. She replied, "I'm fine. Thank you for asking. Just a little tired." His response came quickly. "If you feel anything at all, let me know immediately." Eleanor put her phone away with a smile in her face, feeling that something was changing. Between them, the messages became constant during the day, especially when Alistair was in his company office. He would send messages asking if she was okay, if she needed anything, if she had taken her vitamins. At first, Eleanor responded briefly and politely, but little by little, the conversations became longer. She began to tell him about the medical appointments, about how the baby was developing, about the symptoms she was feeling, and Alistair, too. Her surprise showed genuine interest in knowing Gevering. One night, when Elena was in her room watching television, she heard a soft knock on the door. "Eleanor, may I come in?" It was Alistair's voice. She sat up in bed and quickly smoothed her hair. "You can come in," she replied. Alistair opened the door and stood in the doorway holding a bag. "I brought some fruits you mentioned were craving," he said, extending the bag towards her. "Green apples and grapes. Mrs. Davies said you were getting nauseous with other types of fruit." Eleanor took the bag and felt her eyes fill with tears. It was a simple gesture, but it meant he was paying attention to what she said, that heckled about her well-being. "Thank you," Eleanor said, her voice "You didn't have to." Alistair stood there for a few seconds, looking at her differently. "Actually, I did," he said softly. "I've been an idiot, Eleanor, a complete idiot." She looked at him, not understanding. "When you told me about the baby, I reacted like a scared child, not like the man I should be. And since then, I've treated you as if you were a problem to be solved, not as the mother of my child." Eleanor felt her heart pound faster. It was the first time she had heard him say, my child, referring to the baby. Alistair, she began to say, but he shook his head. Let me finish, he asked. I've spent these last few weeks thinking a lot, trying to understand why I reacted that way, and I realized it was fear. Fear of taking on a big responsibility. Fear of not being a good father. Fear of changing my whole life. He moved a little closer to the bed, but what I feared most was admitting that that night between us wasn't a mistake. It was the truest thing that has ever happened to me. Tears began to roll down Ilana's face. She had waited so long to hear those words. She had dreamed of the moment he would recognize that what they had shared had been special. I never thought it was a mistake, she said. Not for a second. Alistair sat on the edge of the bed, maintaining a respectful distance, but closer than he had been in months. I know I hurt you, he said, and I know it will take time for you to trust me again. But I want to try. I want a baby father this child deserves, and I want to take care of you the way you deserve to be cared for. In the days that followed, the change in Alistair became even more evident. He began to come home earlier, spent time in the living room talking with Eleanor about his day at work, asked about medical appointments, and showed interest in knowing all the details. When Eleanor mentioned she was craving chocolate ice cream in the middle of the night, he left the house at 11 o'clock to buy it from the only ice cream parlor still open. When she commented that she had back pain, he brought a special pillow for pregnant women. One night when they were in the living room talking about names for the baby, Alistair looked at Elena and said, I want to apologize again for everything, for suggesting you get rid of the baby, for treating you as if you were a nuisance, for wasting these months that I could have spent enjoying this pregnancy with you. Eleanor placed her hand on her belly, which was already starting to grow. The important thing is that you're here now, she said. The important thing is that you want to be a part of this. Alistair moved closer to her on the sofa and for the time in months touched her belly over her blouse. Hello, little one, he whispered. Daddy's here and he's not leaving anymore. Eleanor felt the baby move, as if responding to its father's voice, and saw Alistair's eyes fill with tears. It moved, Alistair said, amazed. Did you feel it? It moved when Elena smiled and placed her hand over his. He recognizes. Daddy's worse, she said, and in that moment, for the first time since she learned about the pregnancy, Eleanor felt that they were truly going to form a family. Are you feeling the shift in Alistair's heart? What's your favorite moment of his transformation so far? Share your thoughts in the comments below. A family's embrace. With 6 months a pregnancy, Eleanor's belly was already quite evident, and the baby's movement had become more frequent and stronger. It was a magical sensation for her to feel that life growing inside her. But what moved her most was seeing how Alistair had transformed. He, who once avoided any contact, now sought moments to be near her, to talk about the baby, to participate in every stage of the pregnancy he had missed in the first few months. One night, they were in the living room watching a movie, when Elena felt a series of particularly strong kicks. She placed her hand on her belly and winced. Oh, you rascal, she said, laughing. This child is having a party in there, Alistair. Immediately turned to her, concerned. Does it hurt? Do you want me to call Mrs. Davies? Eleanor shook her head, smiling. No, it doesn't hurt. It's just very active today. Do you want to feel? The question came out naturally, but after asking it, she was afraid he would refuse, that he wasn't ready for that kind of intimacy yet. But Alistair didn't hesitate. He moved closer to her on the sofa and carefully extended his hand. "May I?" he asked, and there was a tenderness in his voice that made Eleanor's heart race. She took his hand and placed it on her belly, exactly where the baby was kicking. The moment Alistair's hand touched her belly, the baby gave a particularly strong kick, making Alistair's eyes widen in surprise and emotion. "My goodness," he whispered. "It's incredible. It's really there, growing, moving." His voice was choked, and Eleanor saw that his eyes were teary. From that night on, those moments became routine. Every time Eleanor felt Thebebe move, she would call Alistair to feel together. He would keep his hand on her belly for long minutes, talking softly to his child, telling him about his day at work, promising to teach him to play football, to ride a bicycle, to be a real man. Eleanor was moved listening to these conversations, seeing how Alistair was connecting with the baby in a way she never imagined possible. One afternoon, when Elena was lying on the sofa resting, Alistair came home from work and found her, with her hand on her belly, a concentrated expression on her face. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately approaching. "Is everything okay?" Eleanor smiled at him. "Everything's perfect. It's just that he won't stop moving, and I was trying to figure out what position he's in." Alistair sat beside her on the sofa. "Can I try?" he asked. Eleanor nodded, and Alistair placed both hands on her belly, gently palpating. "I think the head is here," he said, touching the top of her belly. "And the feet must be down here, because where he kicks the most. You're becoming an expert." Eleanor laughed. Who would have thought the serious businessman would become a baby specialist? Alistair smiled. A genuine smile Eleanor hadn't seen in a long time. "I'm learning," he said, "and I'm enjoying it much more than I imagined." He kept his hands on her belly and suddenly leaned down and placed his osea on her belly. "What are you doing?" Eleanor asked, amused. "I'm trying to hear his heart," Alistair replied. "I read online that it's possible to hear if you stay very still." Eleanor ran her hand through his hair, touching him affectionately for the first time in months. "And can you hear it?" she asked softly. "I think so," he whispered. "It's a very soft little sound, but it's there." These displays of affection became more frequent. Alistair began to caress her belly every time he passed by, sometimes stopping in the middle of a conversation just to place his hand where the baby was moving. During dinner, he asked if she was eating enough, if the baby was active, if she had felt anything different during the day. It was as if he was trying to make up for all the time he had lost at the beginning of the pregnancy. One night, when Eleanor was in her room getting ready for bed, Alistair knocked on the door. "May I come in?" he asked. "I brought something for you." Eleanor opened the door and found him holding a book. "It's about pregnancy and the first few months of baby care," he explained. He thought we could read it together to learn things together. Eleanor took the book and flipped through some pages. It was a complete guide full of information about each phase of pregnancy, a butched birth, about how to care for a newborn. "You bought this?" she asked, emotional. "I did," he confirmed, "and I marked some parts that I found interesting, especially about how the father can help during childbirth." That was the first time Alistair mentioned being present at the birth, and Eleanor felt a wave of happiness. "You want to be there when he's born?" she asked, almost disbelieving. "If you want me to be," Alistair replied. "I know we still have a lot to talk about how things will be after Thebebe is born, about how we're going to organize our lives." But I know I want Tobe present for the important moments, and there's no moment more important than the birth of my child. Over the following weeks, they spent many nights reading the book together, discussing each chapter, asking each other questions. Alistair made notes in the margins, underlined important parts, and Eleanor realized that he was truly dedicating himself to understanding everything about pregnancy and about being a father. Sometimes, when they were reading about the changes in a woman's body during pregnancy, Alistair would look at her with an admiration that left her speechless. "It's incredible what the female body can do," he said one night. "How do you manage to create an entire life inside you? It's the most miraculous thing there is." Eleanor was happy with Alistair's change, but she still had an insecurity that she completely shake off. He was closer, he was being affectionate and present, but he still hadn't talked about feelings, about what he really felt for her. She knew he loved Thebebe. That was clear in every gesture, in every word. But what about her? Did he feel anything for her beyond the responsibility of caring for the mother of his child? That question hammered in Eleanor's head every night when she went to sleep, staring at the ceiling and wondering what their future would be like after the baby was born. Do you think Alistair truly loves Eleanor, or is he just fulfilling his duty? What are your hopes for their future? Comment below. The race against time. In the early hours of a Tuesday in the 9th month of pregnancy, Eleanor woke up with a different kind of pain. It wasn't like the discomfort she had felt in recent weeks, those back aches and the feeling of weight in her belly. It was a pain that came in waves, starting softly and becoming more intense, then completely subsiding, and a few minutes later returning. She lay in bed for a while, breathing deeply and trying to understand if this was really what she thought it was. When the third wave of pain arrived, stronger than the previous ones, she suspected it was the onset of labor, but decided to wait to be sure. For the next 3 hours, Eleanor stayed awake, observing the contractions. They were becoming more regular and stronger, coming every 10 minutes, then every 8, then every 5. She got up a few times, walked around the room, did the breathing exercises she had learned, but pains continued to increase. When dawn began to break, she was certain Thebebe was coming. It was time to go to the hospital. Eleanor quickly showered, trying to calm herself, and went down to the kitchen. Alistair had already left for work. She had heard his car in the garage about 2 hours earlier when held off for that important meeting scheduled for 8 o'clock in the morning. It was a negotiation that had been going on for months. Something about a multi-million-dollar contract that could change the course of his business. Eleanor knew he had prepared a lot for that day, and a part of her felt relieved not to have to make the decision to interrupt something so important to him. Mrs. Davies arrived at 7:30, as she did every day, and found Eleanor in the kitchen gripping the sink during a contraction. "My goodness, child," she exclaimed, rushing to help. "Is it today? Is the baby coming?" Eleanor nodded, breathing deeply as the pain subsided. "The contractions have been regular for 5 hours, she explained. "I think it's Tomato. Go to the hospital." Mrs. Davies immediately grabbed the already packed bag and called the maternity emergency. "Shall we call Mr. Finch?" Mrs. Davies asked as she helped Eleanor into the car. Eleanor hesitated. "He's in a very important meeting. Maybe it's better to wait to see if it's really labor." In reality, Eleanor was afraid that Alistair wouldn't be able to leave the meeting, that she would end up having the baby alone, even if she wanted freedom. "It's better not to create expectations. If it's serious, you can call him later," she said. The journey to the hospital was a mix of anxiety and emotion. The contractions were becoming more frequent and stronger, and Elena gripped the car seat with each wave of pain. Mrs. Davies held her hand and talked to distract her. "Everything will be fine, my dear," she said. "You are strong. The baby is healthy. Soon you'll be holding each other." When they arrived at the hospital, Eleanor was immediately taken to the obstetric emergency room. The nurses performed examinations and confirmed that she was indeed in labor with 6 centimeters of dilation. "The baby will be born today," the doctor said, smiling. "You're doing very well, and it will be fast. First pregnancies rarely progress so quickly." Eleanor was taken to a comfortable room, and the nurses helped her change clothes and get settled in bed. "Is anyone coming to accompany you?" one of the nurses asked. "The baby's father." Eleanor looked at Mrs. Davies, who was standing beside her. "I don't know," she said softly. "He's in an important meeting at work." The nurse smiled sympathetically. "We'll call him." No father wants to miss the birth of his child for a meeting. Eleanor nodded, but deep down, she was prepared for the possibility of having the baby alone. Meanwhile, Alcestis, in the company's meeting room, discussing the final details of a contract that could change the course of his business. It was a negotiation that had been going on for months, and this meeting was decisive. Investors were present, lawyers were reviewing every clause, and everything seemed to be moving towards a perfect agreement. Alcestis was focused, presenting numbers and projections when his phone began to ring. He quickly looked and saw it was Mrs. Davies. For an instant, he thought about not answering, but something made him accept the call. "Mr. Finch," Mrs. Davies said, her voice agitated. "Eleanor is at the hospital. The baby is coming. She's been having strong contractions for 5 hours." The world stopped for Alistair. He looked around the meeting room at the men in suits waiting for his answer about a contract clause, at the papers scattered on the table, at everything that represented his professional life, and suddenly none of it mattered. "What hospital?" he asked, already getting up from his chair. "Mr. Finch," one of the investors said, "we are at a crucial part of the negotiation." "Where are you going?" Alcestis grabbed his ticket and looked at everyone in the room. "My child is being born," he said, his voice firm. "The meeting will have to be rescheduled." One of the lawyers stood up, indignant. "Mr. Finch, this negotiation has been going on for months. What kind of professionalism is that?" Alcestis stopped at the door and turned to the man. "The kind of professionalism of a man who understood that there is something much more important than money and contracts," he replied. "My child will only be born once. Business can wait." Alcestis ran out of the company, got in his car, and drove at maximum speed to the hospital. During the drive, he called Mrs. Davies and asked for information about which floor Eleanor was on, what room. His heart was pounding erratically, a mixture of fear and emotion. He was going to be a father. Truly, concretely, he was going to be a father in a few hours. And Eleanor was going through all that thinking he wouldn't show up. That work was more important than the birth of their child. When Alistair arrived at the hospital, he ran through the corridors until he found Eleanor's room. He stopped at the door, took a deep breath, and entered. Eleanor was in bed, gripping the side rails during a contraction, her face red with effort. When she saw him enter the room, her eyes instantly filled with tears. "Alcestis," she said, her voice choked. "You came. I thought you wouldn't be able to leave the meeting." He walked over to the bed and took her hand. "I wouldn't miss this for anything in the world," he said, Forgive me for not getting here sooner. How are you? It hurts a lot, Eleanor admitted. But I'm happy, very happy. And now that you're here, I feel complete. Alcester kissed her hand and stayed by the bed, holding her firmly during each contraction. He talked to her between pains, distracting her with silly stories, praising her strength, telling her she was the bravest woman he knew. You're beyond incredible, he whispered. Our child is going to have the strongest mother in the world. After 3 hours of labor with Alcester present, the doctor announced it was time. Let's meet this baby, she said, smiling. Alcester stayed by Eleanor's side throughout the entire process, holding her hand, encouraging her to push, wiping the sweat from her forehead with a towel. When the baby was finally born, a loud cry echoed through the room, and the doctor held up the baby for them to see. It's a beautiful, healthy boy, she announced. The baby was placed on Eleanor's chest, and she held him with infinite care, tears rolling down her face. Hello, my love, she whispered. Mummy loves you so much. Alcester looked at his son for the first time and felt an emotion he had never experienced in his life. The baby was small, reddish, with clenched fists and tightly closed eyes, but he was perfect, and he looked just like him. He had the same face shape, the same nose, the same eye and eyebrow line. It was at that moment that Alcester began to cry. He who had always been a controlled man who never showed emotions in public, was there shedding tears of pure happiness. He's identical to us, Eleanor said, looking from Alcester to the baby. Look at his little nose, just like yours. Alcester extended his finger and gently touched his son's tiny hand, which immediately gripped his finger tightly. Hello, my prince, Alcester whispered, his voice choked. Daddy's here, and he's never leaving your side again. I promise. Eleanor looked at Alcester, crying, and felt her heart explode with love. Alcester, she said softly, thank you for being here. Thank you for not giving up on us. Alcester looked into her eyes, holding his son's finger with one hand and her the other. Eleanor, I love you, he said, the words coming out with absolute certainty. I love you, I love our son, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I deserve both of you. Will you forgive me for being an idiot? For taking so long to understand that you two are the best thing that has ever happened to me? Did Alcester's transformation move you to tears? 3 weeks had passed since the birth of little Leo, then Amithi chose together at the hospital. Eleanor was recovering well from childbirth, and the routine with Theobai was beginning to settle into the mansion. Alcester had taken 2 weeks off work, something that surprised everyone who knew him, to stay home helping Eleanor and getting to know his son. He woke up in the middle of the night when Leo cried, changed diapers, bathed him, and showed a patience and affection that Eleanor never imagined he had. During those 3 weeks, they had lived like a real family. Alcester slept in the guest room next to Eleanor's room to be close when the Baba needed something during the night. They had breakfast together, took care of Leo Tagatha, and every night they gathered in the living room to talk about how their day had been, about the new things the baby had done. It was everything Eleanor had always dreamed of having. A united family, a present and affectionate tether, a home full of love. But as the days passed, a worry began to grow in Eleanor's heart. Alcester was being wonderful as a father. That was. He loved Leo with an intensity that moved her every day. But what about her? He had said he loved her at the hospital in the emotional moment of birth, but since then he hadn't brought up the subject again. They were sharing the house, taking care of the baby together, but they still slept in separate rooms. They still hadn't talked about their future as a couple. Eleanor began to question if Alcester was there only because of Leo, if he was being affectionate with her because she was the mother of his child, if he was taking care of her out of obligation and responsibility. The insecurity she had managed to push away during pregnancy returned with full force. Did he really love her, or was he just doing what he thought was right? When Leo grew up a little, he would get tired of the situation and want her to leave. One night, after Leo had finally fallen asleep after a particularly hectic day, and Alcester were in the living room talking of booth changes the baby showed every day, Leo had begun to fix his gaze on their faces, and Alcester was fascinated by it. "I swear he already recognizes me," Alcester said, smiling. "When I go near the crib, he stops crying." Eleanor smiled, seeing his enthusiasm, but inside her anguish only grew. "Alcester," Eleanor said suddenly, interrupting the conversation. "About the baby, I need to ask you something." There was a seriousness in her voice at that made Alcester stop talking immediately and pay attention. "Of course," he said. "What's wrong?" Eleanor took a deep breath, gathering courage to ask the question that had been tormenting her for days. "Are you here because of me, or just because of Leo?" The question came out more direct than she had planned, but she needed to know the truth. Alcester looked at her with a confused expression. "What do you mean?" he asked. Eleanor shifted on the sofa, clearly uncomfortable, but determined to clarify the situation. "I want to know if you truly love me, if you want to stay with me because you love me, or if you're only here because I'm the mother of your child." The words came out laden with all the insecurity she had held back, because if it's just out of obligation, out of responsibility, I prefer to know now. The silence that followed was heavy. Alcester looked at her for a few seconds, swung processing the question, and Eleanor saw several emotions pass across his face. "Eleanor," he began, but she interrupted him. "I don't want you to stay with me. Out of pity, out of duty, because you think it's the right thing to do. I want true love, or I prefer to be alone. Leo will have a wonderful father anyway. I already know that. But I need to know if you really want to spend the rest of your life with me, or if you're only here because circumstances forced you into this." Alcester got up from the sofa and began to walk around the living room, running his hand through his hair. Eleanor felt her heart race, afraid of the answer he was going to give. Maybe she shouldn't have asked. Maybe it was better to live in uncertainty than to discover a painful truth. "Do you want to know the truth?" Alcester said, stopping in front of her. "The truth is that I've been in love with you since that first night we spent together. The truth is that when I said it was a mistake, I was lying to myself because I was scared." Eleanor looked at him surprised. "That wasn't the answer I expected. I've never felt anything like what I feel for you," Alcester continued, "and that terrified me. I always controlled everything in my life, and suddenly you appeared, making me feel things I didn't even know existed. When you told me about the pregnancy, I panicked, not only because of the baby, but because I knew I wouldn't be able to run away from what I felt for you anymore." Alcester knelt in front of the sofa where Eleanor was sitting and took her hands. "I love you, Eleanor. I love the way you care for Leo, the way you transform this house into a home, the way you make me want to be a better man. I'm not here out of obligation. I'm here because you and Leo are my family. You are everything I ever wanted, but never knew I needed." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as she heard those words. Alcester released one of her hands and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Eleanor's eyes widened, not believing what she was seeing. Eleanor, I bought this 2 weeks ago, but I was waiting for the right moment, he said, opening the box and revealing a beautiful engagement ring with a diamond that sparkled under the living room light. I want to marry you, not because I have to, but because I can't imagine my life without you. Alistair, Elena whispered, tears rolling down her face. I can't believe you're doing this. Alistair smiled, that genuine smile she loved so much. Marry me, Eleanor. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that you are the most important woman in the world to me. Let us raise Leo together, and who knows, maybe more children in the future. Let us be the family we both always dreamed of having. Eleanor looked at the ring, then into Alistair's eyes, and saw all their sincerity and love he felt for her. Yes, she said, smiling through her tears. Yes, I accept. I love you so much, Alistair. I always loved you, even when you said it was a mistake. Even when you rejected me, I never stopped loving you. Alistair placed the ring on her finger and stood up to kiss her. A kiss full of love, promises of a future they would build together. When they separated, they hugged tightly, and Alistair held her as if he would never let her go again. Now we are a real family, he whispered in her ear. And I want to give Leo a little sister, a little girl just like you. Eleanor laughed and pulled back a little to look into his eyes with a mischievous sparkle. You're a bit eager for someone who didn't want children, aren't you? The baby just came out of the oven, and you already want to light the fire again. Alistair laughed heartily in that loose, happy way Elena adored. Maybe later, he said, still luring. We have our whole lives ahead of us. They stayed there, embraced, laughing together, knowing they had found true love and the family they always dreamed of having. Did Alistair's proposal make your heart flutter? What's your favorite part of their journey to becoming a family? Share your thoughts below. Happily ever after. 3 years later, the mansion in London was what was once a silent and elegant house was now filled with toys scattered across the living room. Children's drawings stuck on the fridge, and the sound of laughter echoing through the halls. Leo, now 3 years old, ran through the house chasing the dog Alistair had bought him for his 2nd birthday. And in Eleanor's arms was little Sophie, just 6 months old, who had been born exactly as Alistair dreamed, just like her mother. Eleanor was sitting on the terrace breastfeeding Sophie and watching Alistair play football in Degadin with Leo. It was incredible how that man had transformed. The serious businessman who only thought about work had given way to a playful father, who came home from work every day at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, who never missed bathing his children, who woke up in the middle of the night to change diapers without complaining. Alistair had learned to balance work and family in a way Eleanor never imagined possible. Daddy, teach me to kick harder, Leo shouted, running after the ball he had kicked far away. Alistair laughed and ran with his son, pretending he couldn't reach the ball to give the child an advantage. Like this, champ, Alistair said, positioning Leo's foot on the ball. Look where ya went the ball to go and kick hard. Leo kicked the ball with all their strength, his 3-year-old legs allowed, and Alistair celebrated as if it were a goal. In a World Cup final, Sophie stirred in Eleanor's arms, opening her dark eyes that were identical to her father's. Hello, me princess, Eleanor whispered, caressing her little face. Are you seeing how crazy Daddy and your brother are? The little girl made a face that looked like a smile, and Eleanor felt her heart melt with love. Having a daughter had been even more exciting than she imagined. Seeing Alcester with Sophie was a beautiful thing to witness. He treated the little girl as if she were made of porcelain. He talked to her in an even softer tone of voice than he used with Leo. "Love, come here," Alcester shouted from afar, running towards the terrace with Leo in his arms. "Leo wants to show his little sister how he kicks the ball." Elena smiled and stood up, holding Sophie carefully. They gathered in the garden, and Leo, with all the seriousness of Athriold, positioned the ball and kicked it towards Sophie. "Look, Sophie," he said, using the affectionate nickname he had invented for his sister. "1. Day I'm going to teach you to play football. 2. Alistair put his arm around Eleanor's waist and kissed the top off her head. "Are you happy?" he asked softly as they watched Leo play alone with the ball. "More than I ever imagined possible," Eleanor replied, leaning against his chest. "You made all my dreams come true, Alistair. Family, a home full of love, healthy children. It's all I ever wanted." Alistair held her tighter, feeling the same love and gratitude he felt every day since they got married. Their wedding had been when Leo turned 1 in a beautiful ceremony in the mansion sound garden. Eleanor's parents had come from afar to meet their grandson and son-in-law, and had fallen in love with Alcester immediately. Eleanor's mother kept repeating how obvious it was that he loved her daughter madly, and her father had said he had never seen Eleanor so happy. Alcester's family had also welcomed Eleanor with open arms, especially his mother, who was radiant. To finally have a daughter-in-law and grandchildren to spoil. "You know what I was thinking," Alcester said, watching their 2 children in the garden. "That maybe we can give them one more brother or sister in about 2 years. Eleanor Lorden looked at him with an amused expression. "Mr. Alcester Finch, did you become a baby-making machine?" He laughed heartily and kissed her neck. "I just want a house full of many Eleanas and many Alisters running around." Eleanor shook her head, laughing. "Let's take it easy, love. Let Sophie grow up a little first." That night, after the children were asleep, Eleanor and Alcester stayed in the living room talking about the day, as they did every night. It was Elena's favorite time when they were alone and could talk. About everything from Leo's mischief to plans for the family's future. "Do you regret anything?" Alcester asked, playing with her hair. "Leaving your village? Coming to work for a boring man like me?" Eleanor laughed and kissed his chest. "I only regret one thing," she said. "Not kissing you the first day I stepped into this house." Alcester smiled and pulled her closer. "If you had done that, I would have run away scared," he confessed. "I wasn't ready for you back then. I needed time to understand that love isn't something we control, it's something we accept." Looked at his face, seeing all the maturity and wisdom he had gained in recent years. "And now, are you ready?" she asked, teasing. "Now I'm more than ready," he replied. "I'm ready for a lifetime of love, of family, of happiness beside the most incredible woman in the world." And they stayed there, embraced, listening to the silence of the house where their 2 children slept, knowing that they had built exactly the life they always dreamed of having together. And so, dear listeners, we come to the end of this beautiful story of Alcester and Eleanor. A story that reminds us that true love always finds its way, even if we have to go through pain and confusion to get there. Alcester teaches us that we all deserve a second chance, that past mistakes do not define our future, when we have the courage to change. Eleanor shows us that a woman who knows her worth never accepts less than she deserves, but also knows how to forgive when love is genuine. What moves me most about this story is how a moment of passion transformed into a complete. Leo and Sophie not only brought joy into their lives, but were the bridges that united two hearts that were destined to love each other. If this story moved you as much as it moved me, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel to continue living these stories together. In the comments, I want you to tell me, do you think Alceste deserved Eleanor's forgiveness? What do you think about the time it took him to accept fatherhood? Do you know any similar stories in real life? Share this video with that person who needs to remember that it's never too late to change, that true love is always worth waiting for, that in your lives you find a love as pure and transformative as Alceste and Eleanor's, that you never lose faith in second chances, and that you always fight for the family you dream of having.